The morning sun bathed the small town in a soft, golden glow as Horace Mitchell settled into his usual spot at the quaint cafe on Main Street. The town was alive but serene, with the hum of everyday life filling the crisp air. The gentle chatter of people enjoying their morning coffee mingled with the occasional laughter of passers-by. Harris, a former war correspondent turned author, sat quietly at one of the outdoor tables, a steaming cup of coffee resting before him. Though Harris was blind, his other senses were heightened, allowing him to savor the familiar symphony of sounds that painted a vivid picture of the world around him. The light breeze carried the aroma of fresh pastries, and the distant chirping of birds added a layer of harmony to the peaceful scene. Beside Harris sat Charlie, a sleek and disciplined Malinois with a sturdy frame and sharp, alert eyes. Charlie, a retired K-9 officer, was not just Harris's guide, but his guardian and closest companion. Years of rigorous training and high-stakes missions had honed Charlie into an exceptional protector, and even in retirement, his disciplined nature remained unshaken. He exuded a quiet confidence, his posture upright, his ears constantly attuned to the environment. To anyone observing, Charlie was more than just a dog. He was a presence, commanding respect with every measured movement. Harris reached down to gently stroke Charlie's fur, feeling the warmth of his loyal friend. "Another quiet morning, huh, buddy?" he murmured, a small smile playing on his lips. Though Harris couldn't see the serene sky or the bustling street, he felt the calmness of the moment through Charlie's steady demeanor. Their bond was built on an unspoken understanding. Harris trusted Charlie with his life, and Charlie responded with unwavering loyalty. As the cafe continued its morning routine, Harris allowed himself to sink deeper into the tranquility. The click of cups being placed on saucers, the rustling of newspapers, and the muted sounds of conversations created a soothing rhythm. For Harris, these moments were a rare escape from the challenges of his everyday life. He often used this time to reflect, draw inspiration for his writing, and recharge his spirit. Charlie, meanwhile, was never truly at rest. Even in this seemingly safe environment, his training dictated vigilance. His eyes scanned the street, and his ears twitched at every passing sound. The faint buzz of an approaching motorcycle caught his attention, causing him to shift slightly, though he quickly relaxed as the noise faded into the distance. Charlie's every movement reflected his disciplined nature. He was calm yet prepared, embodying the perfect balance between strength and restraint. To the townsfolk, Harris and Charlie had become a familiar sight. Regular patrons of the cafe often greeted them warmly, occasionally stopping by for a brief chat or to admire Charlie's composed demeanor. Children, fascinated by the majestic dog, would sometimes ask if they could pet him, and Harris, with a gentle laugh, would explain, "Charlie's working right now, but maybe later." These interactions brought a sense of belonging to Harris, who had moved to the town seeking solace after years of chaotic reporting in conflict zones. Here, amidst the cafe's warm atmosphere and the townspeople's kindness, he found a semblance of peace. Despite the calm, Harris was always aware of the deeper purpose Charlie served. This was not just a companion, but a highly skilled protector, with instincts that had been tested and proven in life-or-death situations. Harris knew that Charlie's calm exterior concealed a readiness to act at a moment's notice. It was a source of comfort and confidence for Harris, especially in moments when his blindness left him vulnerable. As the morning unfolded, Harris leaned back in his chair, letting the warmth of the sun touch his face. "Life's different now, isn't it, Charlie?" he said softly, more to himself than to the dog. Charlie responded with a gentle nudge against Harris's knee, his way of acknowledging the words. The bond between them was more than companionship. It was a partnership forged through mutual reliance and respect. The peaceful atmosphere of the cafe felt almost timeless, as if nothing could disrupt the harmony of the morning. For Horace and Charlie, This was a moment of reprieve, a reminder of the quiet beauty in life's simple pleasures. Neither of them knew, however, that this fragile calm was on the verge of being shattered. What seemed like an ordinary day would soon spiral into a test of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between man and dog. But for now, they relished the stillness, savoring every second of the peace they had come to cherish. The peaceful rhythm of the morning in the small town felt like a quiet symphony, a harmony Horace Mitchell cherished deeply. Sitting at his usual spot outside the cafe, Horace let the familiar sounds guide him, each one painting an image of the world he couldn't see. Beside him, Charlie sat poised and calm, a silent sentinel who embodied vigilance. The sun's warmth had begun to intensify, and the gentle hum of morning conversations filled the air, creating an almost tangible sense of calm. But calm is often fleeting, and for Harris and Charlie, it would be shattered with the roar of engines cutting through the soft background noise. A deep, guttural sound rolled into the air like a distant storm, growing louder with each second. The rhythmic rumble of motorcycles echoed down the street, their engines drowning out the soft clink of coffee cups and the muted conversations of the cafe patrons. Harris straightened slightly in his chair, tilting his head as if listening for something that wasn't yet clear. Charlie, however, needed no further confirmation. His ears twitched sharply and his posture shifted imperceptibly forward, his body tightening like a coiled spring. The calm he had radiated moments ago was now replaced with focused intensity. The motorcycles came to an abrupt halt nearby, their engines cutting off with sharp, throaty coughs. The sudden silence that followed felt heavier than the noise itself, as if the air had thickened with tension. Harris, attuned to even the smallest changes in his surroundings, reached down to touch Charlie's back. He could feel the tautness in the dog's muscles, a silent warning that something was amiss. "Easy, Charlie," Harris murmured, his voice low but firm. The command wasn't just for Charlie, it was also for himself, a reminder to stay grounded despite the unease creeping into his chest. The footsteps came next, heavy boots striking the pavement with deliberate force, each step louder and closer than the last. Harris couldn't see the three men who had arrived, but their presence was unmistakable. They carried an air of dominance, their movements confident, almost territorial. Grant, the leader, stood out not just for his commanding stature, but for the sharp edges of his laughter that pierced through the cafe's atmosphere. It wasn't a laugh born of joy, but of arrogance, the kind that demanded attention. Grant's leather jacket bore bold patches, symbols that Harris couldn't see but could sense in the way the cafe grew quieter as the men approached. Conversations faltered, chairs scraped against the ground as people shifted uncomfortably. Harris felt the change in energy, like the way the air shifts before a thunderstorm. He didn't need to see the men to know they weren't here for a quiet cup of coffee. "Nice dog you've got there," Grant's voice cut through the air, directed squarely at Harris. His tone was casual, almost amused, but there was a razor-sharp edge beneath it. Charlie's response was immediate and subtle. He didn't bark or growl, but his stance adjusted, and his head turned sharply toward the voice. His eyes locked on Grant, unblinking, his body language radiating a clear message. "I see you." Harris gave a slight smile, trying to keep the situation light. "Thanks," he said, his hand resting on Charlie's leash. "He's more than a dog. He's my partner." Grant chuckled, a sound that didn't carry warmth. "Partner, huh? That's a big claim for a mutt." His friends snickered behind him, their laughter adding fuel to the unease that was building in the air. Charlie didn't move, but his body was tense, his muscles coiled as if ready to spring at a moment's notice. Harris could feel it through the leash, the unspoken language between them. He gave a slight tug, a silent reassurance. "Stay, Charlie," he said softly. But Grant wasn't done. He stepped closer, his boots scraping against the pavement with an intentional slowness. "I've seen a lot of dogs," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But this one looks like he's got a bit of an attitude. Think he's as smart as he looks?" Harris remained composed, but his grip on the leash tightened slightly. "He's smarter than most people," he replied, his tone calm but edged with quiet confidence. Grant leaned down slightly, his hand moving toward Charlie as if to test the waters. It was a gesture that seemed harmless to the casual observer, but to Charlie it was a provocation. The Malinois didn't lunge or bark. Instead, he let out a low, rumbling growl that sent a clear message: "Do not come closer." The tension was palpable now. A taut wire stretched across the outdoor seating area of the cafe. Other patrons began to take notice, their eyes darting between Harris, Charlie, and the group of bikers. Some murmured quietly, others discreetly reached for their phones to record the unfolding scene. The once lively atmosphere of the cafe had grown heavy with anticipation, as if everyone was holding their breath. Grant, perhaps sensing that he was losing the upper hand, pulled back slightly, but his pride was wounded, and the teasing laughter of his friends only fueled his need to reassert dominance. "Relax. It's just a dog," he said dismissively, though his eyes remained locked on Charlie. Charlie didn't waver. His eyes followed Grant's every move, his body language unyielding. He was a picture of restraint, a dog trained to protect without hesitation, but also without unnecessary aggression. Harris, though blind, could feel the weight of Charlie's focus, the silent promise that he would not let harm come to his owner. "Is everything okay?" Harris asked, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but carried a note of unease, as if he could sense the unspoken hostility hanging in the air. Grant laughed again, this time more forced, as though trying to mask his growing discomfort. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, stepping back with a smug grin. But the look in his eyes told a different story, one of challenge, of unfinished business. As the bikers strolled away, their laughter echoed down the street, but the unease lingered like a shadow. Harris ran a hand along Charlie's fur, his voice quiet but steady. "Good boy," he murmured. "You always know." Charlie gave no outward reaction, but his eyes remained fixed on the direction Grant had gone, his body still coiled with vigilance. The morning's serenity was gone, replaced by a tension that clung to the air, leaving Harris and Charlie in its uneasy wake. The calm of the cafe had been replaced by an unshakable tension, a shadow lingering long after Grant and his biker friends disappeared down the street. Harris Mitchell, sitting with his loyal companion Charlie, could feel the unease in the air as though it were a tangible weight pressing against his chest. Though the laughter of the bikers had faded, its echoes carried a silent promise of trouble. Harris ran his fingers gently along Charlie's fur, finding comfort in the dog's presence. Charlie remained alert, his posture rigid, his sharp eyes still scanning the surroundings. Harris knew his dog's instincts were rarely wrong, and the morning's unsettling encounter was far from over. As Harris stood to leave the cafe, Charlie moved in sync with him, his movements precise and deliberate. Together, they navigated the familiar path home. But today, the routine walk felt different. Harris couldn't see the wary glances of passers-by or the way heads turned toward him and Charlie, but he could sense it. The tension hadn't just followed them, it had taken root, clinging to the morning like a storm cloud on the horizon. Charlie's behavior only reinforced Harris's growing unease. Normally composed, the dog's heightened vigilance was palpable. His ears twitched at every distant sound, his head turning sharply with each unfamiliar noise. The leash, usually slack, was taut as Charlie maintained a protective distance ahead of Harris, as though shielding him from an unseen threat. Harris tightened his grip, his voice steady but soft. "Charlie, it's okay," he murmured, though deep down he wasn't sure it was. The faint growl that rumbled in Charlie's throat told Harris everything he needed to know. Trouble wasn't just a possibility, it was near. The familiar creak of Harris's front gate brought a fleeting sense of relief as they arrived home. Charlie hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his sharp eyes scanning the perimeter of the modest apartment. Harris closed the door behind them, but the feeling of safety didn't follow. Instead, an oppressive silence filled the room, broken only by the soft sound of Charlie's paws as he moved from corner to corner, inspecting every inch of the space. Harris couldn't see the dog's deliberate movements, but he could hear them, and it filled him with equal parts comfort and unease. "You're on edge, aren't you?" Harris said, setting down his bag and feeling for the leash clip. He released Charlie, who immediately trotted to the front door, sitting squarely in front of it like a sentry guarding a castle. Harris furrowed his brow, his hand lingering on the leash. "What is it, boy? Did you see something I couldn't?" The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, until it was broken by the faint, unmistakable hum of engines. Harris froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound was distant, but growing louder, each passing second amplifying the knot tightening in his stomach. Charlie stood, his body coiled like a spring, ready to react. His gaze was fixed on the door, and Harris didn't need to see his face to know the dog was on high alert. Then came the knock. It wasn't a casual knock, but a deliberate, heavy thudding that rattled the thin door. Harris's breath caught in his throat as his mind raced. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice firm but edged with unease. A pause. Then, the voice he'd hoped not to hear again. "Relax, man. It's just me. Grant." The name rolled off his tongue like a taunt, dripping with smugness. Harris's grip on the edge of the counter tightened, his knuckles turning white. Charlie let out a low growl, deep and guttural, his stance unyielding. "What do you want?" Harris demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. "Just wanted to talk," Grant replied, though the tone of his voice betrayed him. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. Charlie barked sharply, the sound reverberating through the apartment like a shot fired into the air. Harris stepped back, his hand instinctively finding the dog's sturdy frame. He could feel the tension coursing through Charlie, the slight quiver of muscles held tightly under control. This wasn't fear. It was precision. It was the readiness of a trained protector. "I think you should leave," Harris said firmly, his voice carrying a warning of its own. He tightened his grip on Charlie's collar, silently thanking the years of training that made the dog a force to be reckoned with. Outside, the murmurs of Grant's friends filtered through the thin walls, low and mocking. The scrape of boots on the pavement made Harris's skin prickle, each step closer like a countdown to something he couldn't see but could feel looming. "You're hiding behind your dog, huh?" Grant sneered, his voice muffled but clear enough to cut through the door. Harris didn't respond, but Charlie did. A deep growl resonated from the dog's chest, louder this time, filled with a warning that was impossible to ignore. The moments stretched into what felt like hours, the air thick with unspoken threats. Harris's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, dialing 911 with one hand while keeping the other on Charlie. The dispatcher's voice was a faint reassurance, but Harris knew help would take time. And then, a sudden bang, metal scraping against wood. Grant was testing the door, his actions deliberate, meant to provoke. Charlie barked again, the sound fierce and commanding, echoing like an alarm. Harris felt the leash pull taut as the dog moved closer to the door, his body pressed firmly against it like a barrier between Harris and the danger outside. "Charlie, stay," Harris whispered, his voice calm despite the fear clawing at his chest. The dog obeyed, but his eyes never left the door, every fiber of his being poised to act. The faint sound of sirens in the distance was like a lifeline, pulling Harris back from the edge of panic. The footsteps outside grew fainter, replaced by the sound of engines revving and fading into the night. But Charlie didn't relax. His body remained rigid, his gaze locked on the door, as though he knew this was far from over. Harris exhaled shakily, his hand running down Charlie's back. "It's okay, buddy. You did good," he murmured, though the unease in his voice betrayed him. Charlie, ever vigilant, didn't move from his post. He knew, as did Harris, that this storm was only beginning. The heavy silence that followed the retreating engines outside Harris Mitchell's apartment was short-lived. Despite the faint sound of sirens earlier, the tension in the air lingered, as if refusing to dissipate. Harris sat on the edge of his couch, his fingers nervously trailing the soft, familiar contours of Charlie's leash. The loyal Malinois hadn't moved from his position at the door, his sharp gaze locked on the entrance, as if anticipating another intrusion. His body was a coiled spring of restrained energy, every muscle taut with readiness. Harris, blind yet perceptive, could feel the storm that had settled within the walls of his modest apartment. Something told him the danger wasn't gone. It was merely circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. The minutes crawled by with an agonizing slowness. Harris reached out, his hand brushing against Charlie's fur. "You're still on edge," he murmured, his voice soft but laced with concern. "I can feel it." Charlie responded with a slight shift, leaning into Harris's touch, but his focus on the door never wavered. It was an unspoken message. Stay alert. The sharp knock on the door came suddenly, shattering the fragile quiet and sending a chill racing down Harris's spine. He froze, his hand tightening on Charlie's leash as a familiar voice called out from the other side. "Come on, Mitchell. We didn't finish our chat earlier." It was Grant, his tone taunting, yet laced with a subtle menace that sent Harris's heart pounding. Charlie let out a low, guttural growl, his body pressing firmly against the door as though shielding Harris from the man's presence. Harris felt the vibration through the leash, a physical reminder of Charlie's readiness to protect him. His voice was steady when he called out, but there was no mistaking the edge of unease beneath it. "I already told you to leave," Harris said firmly. "I've got nothing to say to you." "Oh, I think you do," Grant replied, his voice closer now, muffled slightly by the door, but still carrying that unmistakable smirk. "Come on, let's see if your dog is as tough as he looks." Harris exhaled slowly, his mind racing. He couldn't see the malice etched across Grant's face, but he could hear it, feel it in every syllable. His grip tightened on Charlie's leash, and for the first time he gave the command he rarely had to use. "Charlie," he said quietly but firmly, "guard." Charlie responded instantly, his posture shifting from tense to fully alert. His growl deepened, a sound that reverberated through the small apartment and carried a clear warning. Harris, blind though he was, could imagine the scene perfectly. Charlie's sharp eyes locked on the door, his teeth bared just enough to show he meant business. The tension escalated when a heavy thud hit the door. It wasn't a knock this time. It was a deliberate, forceful shove. Harris flinched, but Charlie didn't move from his position, holding his ground like the seasoned protector he was. "Stay calm, buddy," Harris whispered, though his own heart raced in his chest. He reached for his phone on the coffee table, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. As the line connected, he spoke quickly but clearly. "There's someone outside my apartment trying to break in. They've been harassing me since this morning." The dispatcher's calm response was a small comfort, but it couldn't erase the immediate threat. Outside, Grant's voice rose, now loud enough for Harris to hear the mocking laughter of his friends in the background. "What's the matter, Mitchell? Scared? Hiding behind your mutt?" Harris didn't reply, but Charlie did. The dog barked sharply, a sound so fierce and commanding that it silenced the noise outside for a brief moment. It wasn't just a bark. It was a warning, one that demanded respect and attention. Harris, holding tightly to the leash, felt a surge of gratitude for the dog that had become his eyes, his protector, and his partner. Then came the sound of metal scraping against the window pane. Harris's breath hitched as he realized Grant wasn't giving up. The laughter and taunts grew louder, but Harris could sense the desperation beneath them. Grant wasn't just here to intimidate. He was trying to prove something, to himself or to his friends, and that made him dangerous. Suddenly, the sound of splintering wood jolted Harris from his thoughts. Grant had kicked the door with enough force to crack the frame, and Charlie reacted instantly. The dog lunged forward, barking with a ferocity that filled the room. Harris held him back with the leash, knowing that if it snapped, Charlie would do whatever it took to neutralize the threat. "Stop it!" Harris shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The police are on their way." Grant hesitated for a fraction of a second, but his bravado wouldn't let him back down so easily. "Let them come," he spat. "I'm not afraid of some dog or the cops." But even as he said it, Harris could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. Charlie's presence was unrelenting, a force that no amount of bluster could overcome, and then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise outside started to fade. The sound of retreating footsteps and engines roaring to life signaled that Grant and his crew had decided to leave, for now. Harris exhaled shakily, his grip on Charlie's leash relaxing slightly. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice filled with both relief and lingering tension. Charlie didn't wag his tail or relax. Instead, he returned to his position by the door, his eyes fixed on the shadowy street beyond the window. The faint sound of sirens in the distance grew louder, and Harris knew the police would arrive soon. But as he sat there, his hand resting on Charlie's back, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Grant's pride had been wounded, and men like him didn't back down easily. For now, though, Harris and Charlie were safe, their bond stronger than ever in the face of adversity. Whatever came next, Harris knew one thing with certainty. He wasn't alone. Charlie would stand by his side, no matter the danger, and together, they would face whatever storm was still brewing on the horizon. The distant wail of sirens faded into the night, leaving behind an uneasy quiet that blanketed Horace Mitchell's apartment. The adrenaline that had surged through him earlier had begun to subside, but the tension still lingered in the air, heavy and palpable. Harris sat on the edge of his bed, his hand resting on Charlie's back. The Malinois remained by the door, his posture unwavering, ears perked, and eyes fixed on the shadowy world beyond the windows. Even now, after the chaos of Grant's intrusion, Charlie was a wall of vigilance, his disciplined nature refusing to falter. Harris let out a shaky breath, his fingers idly tracing the sturdy contours of Charlie's collar. "They're gone, buddy," he murmured, though the words felt hollow even as they left his lips. Charlie didn't react, his focus unbroken. Harris could feel the dog's tension through the leash earlier, and now through the silence between them. It wasn't just unease, it was a warning. Charlie's instincts had been honed through years of K9 training, and those instincts were rarely wrong. The memory of the confrontation played over in Harris's mind like a loop he couldn't shut off. The sharp, mocking tone of Grant's voice, the laughter of his friends, the sound of the doorframe splintering under the force of Grant's kicks, and most vividly, the low, guttural growl that had rumbled in Charlie's chest, a sound that promised protection, no matter the cost. Harris felt a surge of gratitude for his loyal companion. Without Charlie, the situation could have spiraled into something far worse. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Harris tensed instinctively, but the sound was different this time. Gentler, deliberate. Charlie rose to his feet, his body a tense line of readiness as he moved to stand directly in front of Harris, shielding him from whatever might come next. Harris felt his heart rate spike, his hand tightening on Charlie's collar. "It's the police," a calm voice called from the other side of the door. Harris exhaled in relief, his grip loosening. "Come in," he said, his voice steady but tired. The door opened slowly and two officers stepped inside, their presence a mix of authority and reassurance. Charlie didn't relax, his sharp eyes darting between the officers and the open doorway, his protective instincts still in full force. One of the officers knelt down slightly, holding a hand out toward Charlie in a gesture of goodwill. "He's well trained," the officer remarked, his tone almost admiring. "You don't see discipline like that every day." Harris nodded, a small, weary smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Charlie's more than well trained," he said softly. "He's my guardian, my partner. Without him tonight—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The officer straightened, giving Harris a reassuring nod. The officers began their assessment, asking Harris to recount the events of the evening in as much detail as he could. Harris described everything: the initial encounter at the cafe, the tense walk home, and the confrontation that followed. As he spoke, his hand never left Charlie's back, grounding him in the present. When he described the moment Grant had tried to kick down the door, Charlie let out a soft growl, as if reliving the memory alongside Harris. The other officer, who had been quietly examining the doorframe and window, returned with a grim expression. "There's fresh damage here," he said. "Whoever this Grant guy is, he didn't come here just to talk." Harris nodded solemnly. "I know. He was trying to prove something, to his friends maybe, or to himself. But I don't think this is the last time I'll see him." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions tight. "We'll increase patrols in the area," one of them said. "But you should stay vigilant. Someone like Grant, he doesn't seem like the type to let things go." Harris tightened his grip on Charlie's collar, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his chest. "I don't plan on letting my guard down," he replied, "and neither does Charlie." The officers finished their report and offered Harris additional advice on securing his apartment. As they prepared to leave, one of them paused, glancing back at Harris and Charlie. "You've got a remarkable dog there," he said. "But be careful. If Grant comes back, it might not just be a test of your dog's training. It could be a test of your resolve." Harris nodded, the weight of the words settling over him. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." As the door closed behind the officers, the apartment fell into silence once more. Harris stood for a moment, his hand still resting on Charlie's back. The dog's steady presence was a comfort, but the unspoken tension between them remained. Harris walked to the kitchen, his movements slow and deliberate, and poured a bowl of water for Charlie. The dog approached cautiously, lapping at the water but keeping one eye on the front door. "You've been through so much already," Harris said softly, his voice tinged with both gratitude and sorrow. "I wanted this to be a quiet life for you, a second chance. But it seems like trouble has a way of finding us both." Charlie looked up, his sharp eyes meeting Harris's unseeing ones. In that moment, Harris felt a connection that went beyond words. It was trust, loyalty, and an unyielding bond that neither man nor beast could break. Harris knelt beside Charlie, running his hand gently over the dog's head. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he whispered. The night stretched on, but sleep didn't come easily. Harris lay in bed, his thoughts tangled with worry, while Charlie remained at his post by the door. The faint creak of the building, the occasional sound of distant footsteps, and the memory of Grant's taunts kept Harris awake. Yet every time the fear threatened to overwhelm him, he would reach out and find Charlie's steady presence. The fragile calm of the apartment was a reminder that their battle wasn't over, but it was also a testament to the bond they shared. No matter what storm brewed on the horizon, Harris knew that with Charlie by his side, they could weather it together. And so, as the night stretched into the early hours, man and dog remained vigilant, ready for whatever came next. The first rays of dawn began to filter through the curtains of Harris Mitchell's modest apartment, casting a soft, golden hue over the room. The night had been long and restless, a haze of tension and watchfulness. Harris stirred on the couch, his fingers brushing against the cool leather of Charlie's collar. The loyal Malinois lay at his usual spot by the door, his body coiled in a state of quiet vigilance. Though the immediate danger had passed, Charlie's unwavering posture reminded Harris that the shadow of Grant's threats still loomed. As Harris sat up, he reached out instinctively for Charlie, finding solace in the dog's steady presence. The events of the previous day played over in his mind. Grant's taunts, the sound of splintering wood, and Charlie's disciplined yet ferocious response. For Harris, who had faced countless challenges as a blind man, this was a different kind of trial. It wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, resilience, and the strength of the bond he shared with Charlie. The silence of the morning was punctuated by the occasional creak of the apartment, the kind of small sound that might have gone unnoticed by others, but carried weight for Harris. He had learned to interpret the world through sound, touch, and instinct. In the absence of sight, Charlie had become an extension of himself, a partner whose instincts often revealed the truths Harris couldn't see. That partnership, forged in countless quiet walks and shared moments, had been tested to its limits, and it had held strong. "Morning, Charlie," Harris murmured, his voice soft but filled with warmth. He ran his hand along the dog's back, feeling the ripple of taut muscle beneath the fur. "You've been up all night, haven't you?" Charlie turned his head slightly, his sharp eyes meeting Harris's blind gaze. Though he didn't wag his tail or relax completely, there was a softness in his expression that spoke volumes. It wasn't just loyalty, it was understanding. Charlie wasn't merely a dog trained to protect. He was a guardian who recognized the weight of Harris's vulnerabilities and the responsibility of safeguarding him. As Harris prepared a simple breakfast, he reflected on the lessons the night had offered. It wasn't the first time he had faced fear or uncertainty, but this ordeal had been different. The danger had felt immediate, personal, and relentless. Yet through it all, Charlie's presence had been a beacon of strength. It was a reminder that resilience often isn't found in grand gestures, but in quiet, steadfast dedication. Charlie hadn't hesitated, hadn't faltered, and hadn't let fear dictate his actions. He had simply done what he was trained to do, what he knew was right. Sitting at the small dining table, Harris broke off a piece of toast and offered it to Charlie, who accepted it with measured calm. "You know," Harris began, his voice thoughtful, "I've spent so much of my life trying to prove to the world that I don't need help, that I can do this on my own. But last night—" He paused, the weight of the words settling over him. "Last night reminded me that strength doesn't mean going it alone. It means knowing who to trust. And I trust you, Charlie." The words hung in the air, carrying a depth of sincerity that needed no response. Charlie's quiet presence was enough, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. As the day unfolded, Harris decided to take Charlie for a walk. The fresh air felt liberating after the stifling tension of the previous night. The town, bathed in the golden light of morning, seemed peaceful once more, though Harris knew better than to assume the danger had passed entirely. As they walked, the rhythmic sound of Charlie's paws on the pavement was a steady reminder of the partnership that defined their lives. Passing by the cafe where the initial confrontation had begun, Harris felt a pang of unease, but he also felt a sense of determination. He had faced challenges before, and he would face them again. What mattered most was that he wasn't alone. Charlie's unwavering presence was proof that even in the darkest moments, there was light to be found in connection and trust. This experience had left its mark, but it had also taught Harris something profound. Strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the ability to face it with courage and the right support. It's about recognizing that leaning on others, whether a trusted companion or a loyal dog, is not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the power of unity. As they returned home, Harris knelt beside Charlie, his hand resting gently on the dog's head. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together," he said softly. Charlie leaned into the touch, his sharp eyes softening as if to say, "I'm ready." In the quiet of their apartment, Harris felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead were unknown, but he knew one thing with certainty. With Charlie by his side, he had all the strength he needed. The bond they shared wasn't just a partnership. It was a lesson in resilience, trust, and the unbreakable connection that transforms adversity into triumph. Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story. Together, we can shine a light on the power of doing what's right. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.